If you would like to see book recommendations from Asian or AAPI content creators, you can check out all of these channels, which I'm going to link below. These are all booktubers that I personally follow that I highly recommend. Please go give them a like and subscribe and spread the love. Hey y'all, howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. In May, I participated in 3 different readathons: the Asian readathon, the May the Force Read With You readathon, and the Dystopian readathon. So I'm not going to get into which books fulfilled which prompts and which prompts I followed because I did a whole TBR video about that, which I will link above. You can just go check that out if you want to see which prompts I was following. Basically, I followed that video exactly minus one book I did not get to, which was the final book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. But every other book I followed exactly as I did in the TBR video, which I'm super stoked worked out how I hoped. 4 of the books that I read also met one of my annual reading goals, which I also mentioned in that video. So glad to have those 4 off my list. Even though only 5 of the books that I read were for the Asian readathon, I went ahead and made sure that all the other books that I chose for the other 2 readathons also were by an Asian or AAPI author, since it is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I read a new release. I read some highly anticipated sci-fi and fantasy books, and I had at least one pretty solid disappointment in there as well. So without any further ado, let's just go ahead and get into the 10 books that I read this month. The first book that I read this month is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. And first, just look at this floppy paperback. I love books like this. They're so it just feels good in your hand. It like opens and stays on the page you want really well. Did you hear that? That snap it made when I flopped it back together. These are the best kinds of books to read. I just adore the format of a good floppy paperback. Anywho, that's way off track. Okay, so supposedly this is getting a Netflix adaptation, which I did not know, but I got this trilogy of books for Christmas, the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. So this is a really hyped modern sci-fi series. And in this first book, it is set in China and it kicks off during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which I knew very little about. So I actually did some Wikipedia-ing early in this book when I first started reading it to try and get myself a little caught up on the context of what was going on here. The translator, Kin Liu, also did a great job of providing some historical context and some footnotes. The Extreme Cliff Notes version is that this was a time of extreme cultural upheaval in which the sciences were being demonized as basically capitalist propaganda. Our main character in this book, her father is a scientist and he refuses to denounce the work that he's been doing at the university, and because of that he ends up basically getting stoned to death or beaten to death on stage by a bunch of radical 15-year-old girls. So that's a really shocking kind of intro to what this time period was like. And then it goes through his daughter's life, and she is treated suspiciously by the government because of her ties to her father and also because of her scientific background. The characters in this story, in this trilogy, are told in a very bland sort of way. The characters are clearly just a plot device to move the plot along. And so you don't really care too much about any of the people, but this really is not a character story. This is a story about ideas. And the general idea behind the three-body problem is that aliens are coming to invade Earth. They receive a message that Earth exists, their planet is in turmoil, and they need somewhere to live. And they're so extremely far advanced beyond humans that they basically consider us bugs. And so they start heading this way when they receive these messages, but they don't have faster than light travel. And so because their planet is 4 light years away, Earth finds out that it'll be 400 years before they arrive to take over. And so in that time, governments start trying to get together to figure out how do we deal with this problem? And in the meantime, you can imagine this causes so much unrest among the people of Earth and the different ways that that is interpreted. There's like religions that form around these aliens coming, and there's like different factions within that religion about like whether we should be subservient to them. It just goes on and on and on. There's just so many ideas wrapped up in this story. I gave it 4 stars just because it did make me think really deeply about a lot of ideas, and I think that's exactly what the book was trying to do. So I'm interested to see how this will be adapted as a Netflix show. I think it could be really cool, or it could be one of those like, what the hell did I just watch sort of things. So stay tuned. I'm sure I will watch it when it comes out to give my hot take on it regardless. So that's the first book. The second book that I read was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a nonfiction memoir. Chanel Miller is the victim in the Brock Turner rape trial. And at the time of that event, she was known anonymously as like a Jane Doe, Emily Doe type person. But after the fact, she wrote this memoir and came out and told her own story in her own words. And it is one of the most powerful stories that I've ever read. I just was so taken in by how poignant and thoughtful and clear-headed she was about everything that she went through. And it was really just like a searing look at the American judicial system, the American justice system, rape culture, and how women are treated at large in our society. And it was just so important, and so like it just had me feeling so many things, and so many of the things that she talks about having gone through, I've experienced those things as well, being catcalled on the street, or feeling lesser, or feeling like you don't have a voice. And especially like her situation of not having a voice in a situation that was her own. It was just so heartbreaking and so well written and so like beautiful and horrifying. I just absolutely thought that this is like a must read. Her story kind of came out in like a watershed moment, like right around the same time as Me Too. And I really think that the Brock Turner trial was like a part of this movement that helped change a lot of things. And, because of her case, like laws were changed in California about defining what rape meant, and who should be held responsible and things like that. It's just a really hard read, but well worth it. And I know I'm going to remember this story forever. And I remember seeing this on the news when it was happening and hating Brock Turner's face. I still do. That guy is a fucking twat. I feel connected to Chanel now, and I feel like she spoke for all of us. And I am so happy to have finally heard her side of the story, and just knowing that she's out there speaking for women who don't have that voice. So thank you, Chanel. Okay, my third book of the month was The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is a fantasy novel, and it was so cool. The world building really enraptured me in this story. It's set in this Indian-esque society. There are 2 main characters. Melanie is one of them. She is the sister of the emperor. Her brother's kind of strictly religious, and in their religion, women regularly sacrifice themselves to fire as part of like a cleansing type of thing. And Melanie refuses to do this, and because of that, her brother basically throws her in prison so that she can think about what she's done and the shame that she's brought on their family. And in the meantime, there is the other point of view character is a woman named Priya, who grew up kind of on the street. She's been super destitute her whole life, but she works as a maidservant in this kind of estate. Their society is just ridden with poverty. There's this disease going around called the rot, where this plant gets under your skin, and it grows, you can see the roots growing under your veins, and leaves will pop out under your skin, and it's super painful and gross. And I was just absolutely horrified and taken in by this idea of the rot just spreading. No one knows how to treat it. And you learn throughout the story that Priya comes from a group of highly oppressed people, and she's tried to keep that secret. There's also this really cool temple that much of the story takes place in, where the temple's kind of up on this like rocky mountain that is carved with all these statues of like leaves and vines and snakes and gorillas and all this different kind of stuff all the way up. And you have to climb over all of that stuff to get to the actual temple. So like getting to the temple itself is a pilgrimage. So there was just so much cool world building elements like that that just like really captured my imagination. And I really, really enjoyed like all of that. So this was all a setup for, I believe, what is going to be a trilogy. I know there's a second book called The Oleander Sword, and I don't think the third one is out yet. So I am very excited to get to the Oleander Sword, hopefully maybe next month or relatively soon. The next book I read was Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. This is a collection of science fiction short stories. So if you've been around on the channel for a while, you know I read Exhalation, which was another collection of short stories by Ted Chiang last year, and it was absolutely one of my favorite books of the year. And Stories of Your Life and Others did not disappoint at all. There were, I think, around 10 stories. There was one about the Tower of Babel, where these miners were hired once the tower was built all the way up to the like the floor of heaven. And these miners had to go up to the top of the tower and like try and mine their way into basically the floor of heaven. And it takes them months to get to the top of the tower. It's like this huge ordeal. Very cool concept. The actual namesake of the collection, Story of Your Life, is the short story that the movie Arrival was based on. So if you like the movie Arrival, I highly recommend picking this up. Even though there are obvious differences between a cinematic film and a short story, I thought that they parallel each other really well, and that the movie definitely captured the essence of the story the author was going for, which was really, really cool. There's a story called Hell is the Absence of God, where there are like regular like visits by angelic beings, and they come with all this like thunder and lightning and power of heaven, and it basically every time they visit it causes natural disasters that kill a bunch of people, but they also like bestow miracles on people as well. And so it's like this crazy messed up heavenly world that people are constantly trying to decide, like, is God a good person? Because he's so far removed from like the trials of life on earth. And then the very last one in the collection was called Liking What You See, and it was about this filter that people could put on that would make them basically face blind, not really face blind because they could like still tell people apart, but it like removed all of the beauty from people's faces for them, so that they wouldn't be biased towards more good looking people, and allow them to see people's like true personalities coming through, and just like the cultural implications of what something like that could do. And it was super well done. It was kind of told in like a documentary style, which I thought was really intriguing. So, I mean, those are just some of the highlights. There's obviously more stories than that, but those are some of the ones that really have stuck with me. And I just think that Ted Chiang is an absolute genius. I would read anything that he writes, and I cannot wait for him to produce more for me to consume, because I literally, after every story, I just like look around and I'm just like, wow. He like, reading his books makes me feel smart, but not as smart as him. Then I read the Traveling Cat Chronicles. This I thought was an especially relevant read for me because we are getting ready to embark on a year-long road trip, and we're taking our cat with us. If you want to learn more about that, I just put out a vlog about us trying to renovate our van a little bit to get ready for that road trip. So that was a fun one. But anyway, the Traveling Cat Chronicles is about this little cat named Nana that is adopted by a man named Satoru. They live together for 5 years. They have a great little life, and then he takes the cat on a road trip. And you find out as the road trip is happening that the reason that they're going on this road trip is because Satoru thinks he can no longer keep Nana and wants to try and find it a new home. And so they go and visit like a lot of Satoru's childhood friends and acquaintances, trying to find a good home for the cat. And the story is told almost exclusively from the cat's perspective, which is always just a delight to read. For me, I love stories that have a perspective from an animal because they always point out these like fun, quirky things about humanity that I really enjoy. Every like new chapter or new part of the story also had these really adorable little illustrations of the cat, which I just really loved. So this one was definitely a tearjerker at the end. Obviously, it's about a guy that really loves his cat that has to get rid of his cat. And so like, oh God, it really got to me. But it was such a wonderful little read. It really kind of reflected on life and what is the meaning of life and the people we love, and you know, taking the time to enjoy the little things in life. So yeah, highly recommend. It was really wonderful. Then I read Blue Skinned Gods by S.J. Sindhu. I actually heard about this on the Storying Over's channel, and I am so glad that I read this. It was a very thought-provoking read. It is about a little boy named Kalki who was born with blue skin in India, and his parents raise him to believe that he is a god, that he is like the 10th incarnation of one of the Hindu gods. And because of this, he thinks that he has healing powers, and people come from all over to his little village to be blessed by him. And as you can imagine, this really messes with him and his development as a person. He slowly starts to question his parents and this life that he's leading. Eventually, he escapes this kind of life and moves to America. And even after he gets there, the people that he meets try and kind of manipulate him to be this version of himself that isn't really true to who he is. But he doesn't really know who he is because he's been told he is this thing his whole life. And so it's just a really great exploration of religious trauma, of childhood trauma, familial issues, you know, all those sorts of things I thought were explored really well. My only real complaint about this book was in some of those cases, I wish the story had gone even deeper and explored those more fully. You know, one of the things that his parents and his friends and all these people tell him when he questions these things is like, if people are getting something out of this, if they believe they're being helped, like, aren't you actually helping? Like, isn't this a net positive? Because, you know, people can believe what they want to believe, but if they leave feeling better than they did before, then what's the harm? And just a lot of those sorts of questions that get raised throughout the story. So Blue Skin Gods, really great read. It was a pretty quick read for me. Highly recommend. Next, I read The Dark Forest, which is the second book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, following up from The Three-Body Problem. Once again, this is super heavy on ideas, very light on characterization. I didn't really mind that too much, but in this story, we're continuing on. The aliens are still on their way to Earth, and the government has started up what they call the Wallfacer Project. They have found out that the aliens can see and hear and read in real time basically anything that happens. They can access computer files, they can hear conversations, they can read what's written in a book, like literally anything that happens on Earth, they know about it almost instantaneously. And so it's basically like a very big brother-y situation. So the government creates what they call the Wallfacer Project, in which they select 4 individuals to come up with strategies to defeat the aliens. And they're not allowed to tell anyone what those strategies are, because keeping something in your mind is the only way that the aliens won't know what it is. And so they're given basically like unlimited resources to implement these strategies, but they're supposed to make a bunch of nonsensical decisions as well to try and throw people off their trail, so that anyone who is trying to figure out what their actual strategy is wouldn't be able to do it. And so it's a very kind of bizarre premise that goes in some really interesting directions that I definitely was not expecting. I honestly thought that the first 2/3 of this book were pretty slow. It was a little bit of a slog, even though I was intrigued the whole time, but I wasn't really like pulled in by it. And then the last 1/3 of the book happened, and holy smokes, things just got out of hand really quick. And I was blown away by what happened in the last 1/3 of the book, and I was absolutely loving it. I can't wait to see where book 3 goes, because this was so bleak and unexpected and really had me like on the edge of my seat for some of it. So can't wait to pick up the 3rd book, but unfortunately I didn't get to it this month. Part of the way through the month, my new release pre-order came in, and that is, of course, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I read the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang last year, and it was, again, one of my favorite trilogies that I read last year. R.F. Kuang really impressed me, and so I just absolutely had to have this. And this is her first non-fantasy work. This is a contemporary fiction, and it is a commentary and criticism of the publishing industry and racism and kind of the tokenism in the publishing industry as well. This is a story about our main character named June, who is white, and her friend dies in front of her, and her friend is a famous literary author who is Asian or Asian American. And June, our main character, has always wanted the fame and fortune that her friend had. But even though her friend considered June a friend, June considered her more of a rival because she had so much more success than June did. And so when her friend dies right in front of her, she steals her friend's manuscript, even though it was about Chinese history and the treatment of Chinese soldiers during like World War I. She basically like tries to pass it off as her own story, and she changes her pen name to make it sound vaguely Asianish, and she takes kind of ambiguous pictures that makes it seem like she could have some sort of ethnic background that she doesn't have, and she doesn't get any cultural sensitivity readers. And then, so it's just like, yeah, she basically puts on Yellowface to try and sell this book that doesn't belong to her. And she is such an interesting and despicable character. I absolutely hated her. I absolutely despised her. And most of the time when I don't like a main character, it makes the book not that likable. But she was also like weirdly relatable in like really disturbing ways. And the way she just like explained away all the things that she was doing, like there was a couple times where I was like, oh, I get where she's coming from, or like, oh, I feel that. And then she would turn around and do these like horrible things, and I was like, dude, she does not get it. Like, she is unhinged. And this book just gets more and more unhinged all the way to the end. And literally at the end, I was like, what? I did not expect this to be as kind of thrillery at the end as it was. I just thought it was more of like a contemporary story that was going to be about like Twitter blowups and social media drama, which it was definitely about all of that. But it definitely also had like a lot of thriller aspects to it, which definitely gave it kind of that gripping feel. And I'm pretty sure I read this entire book in a day. So highly recommend. I think it will definitely appeal to bookish types of people more so than the general audience, because it talks so much about the ins and outs of the publishing industry. But yeah, highly recommend this book if that sounds interesting to you. All right, my second to last book of the month was She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This was by far my biggest disappointment of the month. The basic premise here is this young girl grows up in extreme poverty in China several centuries ago. It's like a historical fantasy. Her brother is given this great fate. They say he's destined for greatness, and then he dies very suddenly, and so she pretends to be him in order to get this great fate that he was assigned. And she thinks that by pretending to be him, that she can become great. And so she, pretends to be a man. She goes to this monastery. She ends up getting involved in this war as an adult. All sorts of sort of political machinations happen as a result of this. But the fantastical elements of the story were extremely light. I think I was like halfway through the book and I was like, has anything fantastical happened? And then I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, I guess she sees ghosts. And then there's like a little prophet child that can like make flames appear in his hand. But like literally none of this felt very relevant the entire story. And I was like, this could have just been a historical fiction. So that was a big letdown. I don't know. I just want more fantasy when I think I'm reading a fantasy book. So I just didn't get what I wanted out of the genre in the story. Also, I just didn't really love the writing style. There were these really abrupt transitions that would happen where like we'd be launched into a new part of the story and I would start reading and be like, am I supposed to know what's going on? And it was like the author was like putting the reader in a situation where it seemed like we should know what was going on, but then it wasn't revealed until later. And I was like, it seems like I should have information that I don't have. I don't know if this was supposed to like build mystery or suspense, but all it did was make me really confused for like paragraphs at a time. So I just didn't really love that, obviously. Also, a lot of the characters were just like very skin deep. There weren't a lot of characterizations to be had in this book. I felt like there was potential for some of these side characters to really shine, and they were pretty one-dimensional. And then there was just like a kind of awkward sex scene thrown in that I don't mind. I don't mind a little getting jiggy with it, you know, in my stories sometimes. Like, that's fine. That's part of life. It's part of stories. I get it. But just because because I felt so little for the characters and because they'd had so little romantic interaction in the story up to that point, and then all of a sudden we got this kind of like sex scene thrown in, I was just like, okay, what? Anyway, it just felt a little weird to me. So I was really intrigued by the story. The story itself, I loved the idea of it. I just didn't love the implementation of it. So I'm not really sure whether I'm going to pick up the sequel or not. I think I'll probably wait and see what other people have to say about it before I decide if it's worth getting back into, because like I said, I like the idea of the story, but I don't really know that I care enough to know what happens in the end. The sequel comes out later this year. It's called He Who Drowned the World. Okay, and then I've been talking for a long time already, I feel like. The last book that I read this month is Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng for Dystopian Readathon. This is obviously a dystopian book. This is basically set in our world. Like, the dystopian elements of it are like super not far removed from where we are in the world today. So that made this a pretty unsettling read. Basically, there was like this crisis, economic depression that really upended society for like 3 years. And then in order to bring everything back to normal, they blame everything on China and the Chinese people for messing everything up. And so there's like extreme racism against anyone who looks vaguely Asian. All of these Asian-inspired books are removed from libraries, and it's just basically like a lot of government-sanctioned racism. And part of this was anyone who seems unpatriotic or acts unpatriotic, like, can have their children taken away because they don't want like these seditionists raising more seditionist children. But that's obviously wielded kind of uncaringly to anyone that seems vaguely Asian and anyone who protests against this sort of policy. So our main character is a little boy named Bird, whose mother was a poet and an Asian American, and his mother leaves he and his father when he is like 9, I want to say, because she is afraid they will take him away, and she would rather he be able to live a normal life with his father than to be separated from them entirely and given to a different family. When the boy is 12, he gets kind of a cryptic letter from his mom and decides to go and find her. And so the first half of the book is about the boy, and then the second half of the book, we get more of the perspective of the mother. And it's just really a sweet story. Like, as much as a dystopian story could be sweet, it's about like the love that a mother has for a child, and like a love of libraries and poetry and things, and like the idea that words can infiltrate the cracks of an oppressive society and make people see the truth. And yeah, I love the idea that like librarians would be the ones saving the world if this sort of dystopia happened. I don't really believe that's the way it would work, but I think that's part of what made it so beautiful. Is just it was a beautiful idea of a story, and it ends kind of on an unresolved note. They don't really repair anything, they don't fix anything. The dystopia is not ended or anything like that, but I think that was kind of the point, is just to make us kind of think about all these things. So I thought it was really beautiful, and I would recommend it to anyone who thinks that sounds interesting. So those are the 10 books that I read in the month of May. I really enjoyed participating in all these readathons. I really enjoyed almost all of my reading experiences, and I'm so glad that I read all these books. So thank you guys for coming here to hang out with me for a little bit today to hear about these book recommendations. And if you enjoyed this content, please be sure to like this video. And as always, be kind, read books, and hit the subscribe button below for more bookish content to come. I'll see you next time.